You touch me and I'll knock you out.
So on episode 3, we had a 2-hour-long conversation with the boy, Colin Campbell. He has his own podcast, Campbell Conversations. We're going to split it into 2 parts because I know you guys have TikTok brain and you'll switch off after 30 seconds. So part 2 will be coming out a week from when this podcast is released, which is Wednesday right now. So this Friday, part 1 will be released. Enjoy the fuck out of it. Take all the wisdom you can because there's a lot to learn, and tune the fuck in. TikTok brain, switch on. So, welcome back to the More Life podcast, and on episode 3 we're doing something a little bit different. We have our first guest, Colin Campbell. So we're going to pass it to Cole and let him introduce himself. I feel like it's only right. So yeah, welcome Cole. How are we today?
Gents, I'm feeling good, and it's a pleasure to be the first guest in the show.
Woo. Come on.
That you guys have taken the step to start a podcast as well. Genuinely one of the best things that I've done in my entire life was starting a podcast. So you guys have taken that step. There's so much more to come, but these early days are going to be good fun as well. And in terms of me introducing myself, my name's Colin Campbell from a lovely part of the world called Bears Den, which you guys were across in today.
Yes, sir.
When we trained this afternoon. I am 31 years old, and I would define myself as a little bit of an office athlete because at this moment in time, I'm still working in my corporate career. I'm a sales director for a multinational furniture firm. And alongside that, I'm pursuing peak performance in the other areas of my life as well that really matter to me, which is things like my health, my fitness, and of course, I mentioned I've got my own podcast as well. So I like to be somebody that pursues excellence across the different fields that I turn my hand to. And at this moment in time, that's career, business and fitness, and of course the pod as well.
Yeah, class. That's amazing, man. And one thing I feel like we all connect on a very good level is fitness and how it starts to relate and kind of have a really good effect in business as well. So yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about that and how you feel your levels of fitness affect your business and how disciplined you are in business. So
one of the phrases that I've used many, many times, and if anyone's come across here from my audience to listen to this, they'll laugh, but I say that fitness is a gateway drug.
Yeah.
And people talk about lots of different drugs as gateway drugs, but if we strip it back to fitness, the number of times that I've seen both myself and individuals around me pursue excellence and achieve some sort of mastery of their body, guess what? They end up feeling more confident in their work. They end up feeling more confident in their relationships. They end up feeling more confident about putting themselves forward for that daunting promotion. They end up closing more deals or whatever it is they're working on. It can really be a pebble at the top of the avalanche that starts things moving in the right direction.
Yep.
Because so many people in today's society are a little bit lost, whether that is that they're overweight, whether that's unfulfilled. I really believe that if you give yourself the opportunity to take control of how your body looks and all the different variables that enable that to happen,
yep,
and we can talk about that, Kyle, that gives you a confidence that can translate into other areas. And best believe one of the easiest areas to get a control over is probably what goes in your mouth and what you do in terms of your exercise.
Of course.
That's a pretty good start point.
Yeah.
And then who knows what comes after that. And for me, I know that when I'm dialed in on those areas, I give myself the opportunity to be confident, to be articulate, to be forthright in all these other areas that matter to me as well. But I do think, like, if we're looking at like a pyramid,
yeah,
it's one of the lower down, like the foundational things is how I'm feeling about my health and my body.
100%. And we spoke about it in our last podcast. We literally did. A lot of people wouldn't even start a gym because they say, I don't need a six-pack. But it's what the six-pack gives you, right? And also getting that six-pack, you need to be disciplined. We spoke about discipline being the highest form of self-love you can give yourself. If you love yourself, you're going to be a very confident person. Like Cole said, if you're a confident person, you're going to take that promotion at work. You're going to make more money, give yourself the freedom, okay? So that six-pack, you wanting that six-pack doesn't really matter because what it's going to give you is a lot more valuable than actually having the six-pack.
The behaviors around it. Exactly that. So I know very few people that are in really good shape that don't have some form of mastery in other areas of their life. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure we could all pull up
hundreds, yeah, exceptions
who are like exceptions to the rule. But they're exceptions to the rule. Like if you go into a gym and you see somebody who is in relatively good shape and turns up regularly there, they're probably doing something of relative value in the other areas of their life because they've shown up for themselves in another arena, in another domain, and it's transferable skills after all.
100%. The biggest thing as well when it comes to transferring over is because it's all principle based. So discipline, one of the most important things I feel like we all carry as successful people, is something that can be transferred into just acting on anything else in your life. So business, gym, lifestyle, relationships, anything like that. If you have discipline which will also allow for consistency, you're going to compound those efforts to improving where you currently are. So it is a process, but as Cole said about getting that six pack, it's what you need to do in order to get the six pack that will help kind of transfer into other areas of your life, like business. Talking about business, obviously you've got a relatively high level job. Talk about that. Like, I don't really know too much about it. So like, what do you do, mate?
We were laughing when we first started speaking. You looked at my personal brand Instagram, and you were like, I have no idea what this guy does for his money and for his lifestyle.
For sure.
He's living a relatively nice lifestyle, but he appears just to have a podcast.
This guy a drug dealer, maybe?
Yeah, certainly not. Certainly not. I would have been caught by now. It would be too public. I think in terms of, you're talking about fitness leading into business. I was into fitness during university. So I studied politics at university, of all things. That's probably why I'm quite like to debate and talk about different topics.
Makes sense.
And that was a degree that, unlike being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or a dentist, it doesn't actually qualify you for anything really, but it qualifies you for lots of different things in terms of the skill set that it develops. Not really. I went to University of Glasgow, so it's considered a really good university. I got a really good degree, but I think something like 33% of graduates from my course at Glasgow Uni go into some form of politics, and that's not like MP, MSP, First Minister, Prime Minister stuff. It's like local council, like representative, not even like an elected representative, but like maybe like you work for the MP,
like
and like
someone's shoes.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, that was never really something I considered. I also don't know if I would be electable with some of my politics in the general population. But when I was at university, I was not the confident, assured guy that I am now. I was into sports. I played a lot of rugby. I had started lifting weights by that point, but I hadn't got true mastery of my body. And as that started to develop, probably kind of, and bear in mind, I'm 31, guys, so I'm going to make you guys feel really old here. But this is maybe like halfway through university, 2012. I was watching a lot of fitness YouTube, likes of Christian Guzman. I don't know if you guys remember him. A guy called Chris Jones, who was known as Beast Mode Jones back then, which is funny because our mutual friend Sean Lazarini's got the same username.
Laza by Beast Mode.
And I was understanding from them about macros, about training splits, and I was watching these guys build these huge online fitness businesses as well, and I was like, wow, these guys have got like control of this area of their life, and they can control this area of their life as well. And so I was becoming more and more confident in my time at university in who I was as a person. And we were talking about discipline, consistency. When you show up for yourself in that field, I just started showing up for myself in terms of preparing harder for the lectures and the seminars so I could go in and have better conversations, so I could get better grades. And I'm relatively intellectual, so I was already getting good grades, but I started to get excellent grades, and I started being more confident to have challenging conversations with the lecturer, with the tutorial people, with the different students in the class as well. And alongside that, one of my summer jobs was working for a business called Ensley Insurance, which is like insurance for students and their gadgets. And this was a sales role. So this was my first exposure from a business perspective. I told you I'll bring it back round. From a business perspective, this was my first experience of selling something that was of value to them, but they just didn't know it yet. Because what student wants to pay $9.99 a month or more to insure their iPhone or their MacBook or whatever else they brought with them to university that they care about? Not very many. But how many of them actually need that? Because could they replace a £1,000 MacBook or a £500 or £600 iPhone on the night out they dropped it on, or if they left their halls unlocked, or some of the silly stuff that happens when you move away to university for the first time? So I was working in a summer job selling to freshers, to first year, second year students who cared about their possessions, and I got this first experience of going up and talking to somebody about what they cared about, and me having a solution that I was selling for like however much it was. And I was getting, one, a salary, but also commission on how many I was doing. And the nickname my boss gave me at the time, and I still look really young as we were talking about, was the baby-faced assassin. I used to
I knew you were going to say that,
numbers and numbers and numbers and numbers. And this was my first kind of like venture into the sales world, and I was hooked immediately.
Sick. Now, I was going to make the point there. When you're saying before, or Colin wasn't confident, right? What he done was build up proof to feel confident based on, right? So in life, you might not be confident with the gym, business, anything like that, because you've not really got any real proof. So once he started to be disciplined, once he started to stack the evidence, it allowed him to become that new person, reevaluate himself as someone that is confident, that allowed him to challenge the lecturers, like kind of have conversations that were before too uncomfortable to have, but now he's that confident person that can look at the proof of doing things for himself and actually have those things and go forward and be better. Do you know what I mean? So
there's that Hormozy quote at the moment, isn't there? Like, stack undeniable proof until you are the person you say you are.
yeah, completely.
And you just do it over and over and over again. And sometimes you're going to fail and you're going to get setbacks and you're going to get knockbacks and maybe I didn't get the best grade or maybe I didn't make the same sales that I did the week before. And these things are all part of the journey.
Yep.
But ultimately I was on an upward trajectory because of the ownership that I'd taken over my own life as well.
That's
And I was on
crazy.
like a good enough path. But
Yep.
is good enough really good enough? Probably
100.
not for kind of people that would listen to a conversation like this one.
Exactly. So if we were to go back in future pace and alternate universe of you didn't start the gym, like where do you think you'd be now?
Yeah, I think I would still have ended up like doing well at university.
Imagine you
in
never gymmed though, one day. Imagine you
Yeah.
were one of those people that just focuses on their job and never gyms. Do you think,
Soft belly,
because we
skinny
think
arms.
when we're saying about the gym, confidence, discipline, consistency, all those principles reinforced daily for months and years has allowed you to become the person you are today. Like, it's fucking crazy to think, like, where would you be if you never started the gym?
It's a great question because it really makes you reflect on like the type of person that you've built, and built is a key term there
100.
because ultimately I was on a trajectory that was good enough. Like we just said, that was the term we used.
Yep.
Yeah.
But how many people that tune into a self-development podcast or tune into a podcast like this one are satisfied with good enough?
Nah, they
So
want
for
to be
me, I would have ticked some boxes. I would have got a degree from a Russell Group institution. I would have probably got some sort of job, probably not a sales job because I wouldn't have been confident in myself to do it.
Exactly,
I
bro.
would
It's
have maybe got
crazy.
an operations job or something where I was a bit more out of the
there.
limelight.
More
Yeah.
comfortable.
Whereas 100%.
Comfort. That's
Exactly. Well, comfort's an enemy as well. Like we all know that and we understand that. So I probably would have just been ticking over.
Yeah.
Meaning, like one of like the most like frightening things for me is if I was to be on my deathbed and think about the person that I could have been
Yeah.
versus the person that I became.
Yeah.
And if there's a massive delta between those two, that's really alarming.
Yeah.
Because the only thing that really stopped you, maybe some macro factors like a pandemic,
Yeah.
a crisis, okay? The only factor that truly probably stopped you was yourself and the efforts you put in and where you aligned yourself.
Yeah. And the awareness you had to take action on what you know is right. Because a lot of people do still listen to that survival instinct, fight or flight, emotional reaction. We deal with it on a daily, but we have the awareness and control to overcome that and know what the better decision is. And it's usually not the emotional one, but the logical one. So how did you feel? Did you feel like the gym allowed you to start to overcome that emotional reaction? Like the resilience of that came from?
I think
Because you like chinning a lecturer. I'm not saying you went up and started scrapping with them, but you confronting someone that's been doing that his whole life. Like that.
I've always been relatively disagreeable.
Okay.
That's like, I think that's a masculine trait as well, actually.
Yeah.
If you look at the most masculine figures in
Yeah.
popular culture, they are able to disagree.
Yeah.
But by being able, but that wasn't me in those first 2 years at university. At school, I was a high achiever. I was well known in terms of like intellectually,
Yeah.
not socially. I wasn't super popular at school. I was pretty shy actually.
Yeah.
But within my domain of like politics, modern studies, history, these kind of subjects, I was like able to like own my space.
Yeah.
At university, you go into a lecture hall of 500 people. It takes a lot for you to actually step outside of that.
Yeah.
And yet ultimately confidence in my body and how I looked and how I felt about myself needed to be developed in order for me to go and do that.
100%. But when you say gym, though, right, we're not just speaking about the gym because with the gym comes your habits, right? So that was one of the things we were going to ask was, as someone that is successful, someone that is very high functioning, like on a day, you probably don't take days off, full days off, maybe like parts of the day where you have downtime, the day going to the gym and stuff like that. But what kind of habits would you say form your routine and form your ability to be successful and continue the momentum towards where you want to go?
Do you know one of the most underrated things that I do is I'm walking all the time. Now, that sounds so simple. And I think some people started to get an appreciation of this during the C19 period when there was a lockdown and things were closed. People started to walk more.
Yeah.
And you saw people like, oh, I'm going to go for my hour-a-day walk. A lot of people don't do an hour-a-day walk now
No.
and didn't before it, but they did during this mad little period where the government psyoped you into thinking you should do it,
Yeah,
which is great.
yeah.
And that was maybe one of the only healthy things they encouraged you to do during that period.
Legit.
And for me, I walk every morning before I log on. I work from home quite a lot of the time. Obviously, if we fast forward from the sales job at university, I've gone on to be a sales director. I walk every morning before I log on my laptop because I have to, one, serve myself first, but also get my mind and my brain moving. So I'm listening to content that's going to stimulate me, put me in the right headspace. I'm either researching an upcoming guest that I'm going to interview, or I'm listening to a show that I like of a thinker that I am stimulated, motivated by.
Nice.
So by the time I turn my laptop on at 10 to 9 and I start into this mad world of emails and Teams and Slack and PowerPoints and presentations and emails, I'm ready. Like, I'm set. Whereas if you could roll out your bed 8 o'clock, have a coffee, have a shower, and then sit down to work, and you've not served yourself at all. Maybe you've had a quick scroll on TikTok or Instagram. Maybe you got fortunate and you saw something that moved you in the right direction that morning, but the chances are it's not as good as a long form piece of content. So for me, one of my number one habits that is underrated is, one, I'm getting movement. I'm increasing my NEAT, my thermogenesis, so that I'm able to eat more calories, more food. It also raises my appetite before I get back as well. But I'm also stimulating my mind and my body and my brain. And I use a corny phrase sometimes, that motion is lotion. If you move, honestly, the ideas that come to you are so much better than if you were just stationary and stagnant the whole time.
100%. And so you're making that point, though, about serving yourself in the morning. Most people wake up, as you said, they'll scroll, they'll probably fucking sit in the toilet and do a shit for half an hour when they don't need to. You're serving yourself as soon as you wake up. That self-respect is there on a daily basis in the morning at the start of the day. So as well as winning the morning, you're proving to yourself that you still respect yourself. You're still that confident person that sticks to that same routine. So, and again, that's what a lot of people are missing. They're missing that serving themselves. Okay, so what you're doing, right, in the morning is you're waking up, going that walk. Future you at 10 to 9, right, is being served by that walk. So you're living for future you as soon as you wake up, which a lot of people don't do. They live for present them. So what does present them love? Sitting on the toilet doing a shit scrolling, that feels amazing. But what Cole does is he goes a walk, stimulates his brain, thinks about what he's going to feel like in that seat at 10 to 9, and who can he then be for the people that work on the calls, presentations. He can fucking absolutely smash it because he served future him. Future him's now in a better position because of the action that he took as present him in that morning, which is sick.
It sounds really simple, and that's why sometimes when clips come out of podcasts like these, people get annoyed because you're giving them information that they know is obvious. But common sense is not common practice. So how many people do you know that know they should probably move a little bit more before they start their day? A lot of people know that.
Everyone knows
a lot of CEOs that you hear talk that are really successful, and again, some of their morning routines really piss people off. They do some sort of workout in the morning. Because they know their day's going to be so busy, so hectic, something will happen that the workout will get delayed. So they train in the morning and they say, and I feel great going into work after I've trained because I've served myself first. So many people know that, but get triggered by you telling them that. And you're like, okay, well, you just weren't ready to hear the message yet. That's fine, but I'm going to tell it to people that are ready and ready to action it as well. And like if I'm doing a cut, for example, I will try and do 10 before 10. So 10,000 steps before 10. That's more than an hour walk. That's me getting up extra bit earlier so I can walk a little bit longer. But I'm using that time as practically as possible to get me ready to serve myself, to serve others, to be articulate, to be dialed in, to think about things that I wouldn't be thinking about if I was in that kind of rushed fight or flight state that you do when you wake up and you're running late, which so many people
You're quite zoomed into what's going on.
Of course they do. And we live in, a lot of the people listening to this live in Scotland as well. And they'll be thinking some mornings it's so grim. There's actually an added upside to that as well. If you do something that's a little bit hard in the morning as well, you also work with your brain chemistry to release some sort of dopamine, which gives you a reward for the effort that you've made. A lot of people consider dopamine to be the kind of pleasure chemical, partly, but it's also the reward chemical for doing work. We are getting dopamine from our screens, from porn, from drugs, from these other things, but we're getting earned dopamine by doing hard things. So see when it's pissing with rain, like you guys are maybe familiar with Jocko Willink, he says good. So see when something goes wrong, he's like, good. So see when it's pouring in the morning and it's actually even too windy to put a fucking umbrella up, of which I've got a big golf one, and I try and like use that to get round so I'm not soaked and have to shower when I get back and get my work stuff on. I'm like, okay, brilliant. I get to pull out the boots, I get to pull out the jacket and just get soaked in that. And don't be wrong, I've got my procedures afterwards so I can get ready for work in time and stuff like that. But I'm also delighted that I'm going to do something that's hard that other people might not do as well. And there's a sick level of me that gets a bit of a kick from that. I'm out walking and I'm like, other people are probably staying inside today. Maybe they had to drive to the gym to walk on the treadmill. Don't get me wrong, I've done that too when it's been really, really bad. But I've done the thing that I said I was going to do, and it's reinforced my identity, my character before I've even started.
Because that's the thing, a lot of people avoid negativity. And that's because a lot of what is propagated to us is just success, winning. We don't really see too much failure of all these high and mighty people that are held on pedestals. We only really see the good parts of it. So when negativity comes around, we don't really know how to handle it, because we don't see these celebrities, these fucking athletes dealing with failure, dealing with struggle. So that's why I feel like there's a lack of awareness to when negativity does come around, you just shut down, and that's what stops you. So it is just being more self-aware. Do you feel like self-awareness can allow you to overcome that initial reaction if that is something that you look outside and it's raining and you don't go your morning walk because there's that added bit of negativity to overcome?
Yeah, I think when you understand how you're predispositioned, there's a lot of power that comes with that, because it gives you the opportunity to either work on the areas that are potentially not in alignment with who you want to be.
Yep.
And also lean into the areas that are already predisposed to be the way that you want to be, and kind of make your strengths even stronger while sharpening up some of your weaknesses. Now, I've done a lot of different personality testing, and I had a guy on the podcast called Thomas Erickson. He wrote a book called Surrounded by Idiots, and it's all about the DISC personality model, which is like 4 different colors, and a lot of different companies and corporate businesses will put you through that testing as well as part of your company. But you can do all these things online for free as well, Myers-Briggs, tests like that. One I like as well is Jordan Peterson's Understand Me, so that's maybe one for the listeners. I think it was like $8, but it's a comprehensive report you get from it as well. And you can really understand the way that your personality is predisposed. Are you conscientious? Are you hardworking naturally? Are you somebody that's neurotic? Are you someone that's anxious? Are you someone that's got a positive outlook? Are you someone that's got a negative outlook? Are you somebody that is extroverted? Are you somebody that's introverted? All these things are quite helpful to understand.
Yep.
But that's not you automatically confirmed to be playing with the cards you've been dealt. Best believe you can shape things and change things in the way that you want to do.
Yep.
Like we were talking about the Michelangelo effect, where we're talking about this big block of marble that you have in front of you. That can be yourself, and you can chip away at it and build the sculpture that the way that you want it to be in terms of shaping it in a particular way. And for me, understanding some of my predispositions, I'm actually naturally quite fortunate in some regards in terms of I really like work. I really like doing things that are hard. I wasn't always organized. I've become a more organized person. The gym forced me to do that, because with a busy schedule, best believe you have to really schedule the time to train and make that happen. So for me, when I think about some of the things that you're talking about there in terms of does the fact that negativity might get in the way of me doing the walk or whatever else, I am fortunate of how I'm wired naturally, but also I'm continually trying to reinforce that character by doing the thing that I said I was going to do when I said I was going to do it. And that builds up over time to the extent that it just becomes natural. Like for me, missing the gym is completely unthinkable.
Oh, you feel shit.
Completely unthinkable. Missing my walk is borderline unthinkable. It would be like me not brushing my teeth. Genuinely.
For sure. That's
unless something was on where I had to go for a train at 6 a.m. or something like that as well, I'm not going to go for my walk. But best believe regularly I'll get a taxi to the train station and then I'll walk around the train station until my train comes, because that's just how I am. That's just how I am. Like it needs to be done.
You've trained your brain like that. So that's
Great
what
phrase.
I'm saying. When you're saying I still go a walk when it's raining, and you're saying Jock Williamson?
Jocko Willink.
He says that's good, right? It is definitely good, because you're then training your brain, right? Neuroplasticity. You're training your brain to actually put effort in to get that dopamine hit, rather than watching porn, scrolling. All these things require zero fucking effort, and that's why you might feel demotivated, because you're frying your dopamine system, because all you're getting is short-term gratification with zero effort involved. But like Cole said, if you put in a wee morning walk, which is actually quite enjoyable, being mindful, listening to a podcast, or just having that time to be present, if there's a little bit of effort to get dopamine, right, you're going to start to retrain your brain to put effort in to get the dopamine, and you're going to stop grabbing onto short-term pleasures, which is fucking ruining everyone's life. And we spoke about being victims. Victims, a common trait is short-term gratification, whether it's watching porn, eating shit food, avoiding the gym, just doing things that feel nice in the moment, short-term, nothing that actually requires effort involved, which is like the worst way to fucking train your brain, is to grab onto short-term gratification. It's ruining a lot of people's lives, man. During the workout today as well with Cole, he said something that really made me think. It's been playing on my mind literally since this fucking podcast, and it was someone's keeping count. Right? So like, see, when I think of that, obviously if you're doing these little things that you know are against where you're trying to go, so if you are scrolling a little bit more and being less productive when you know you've got things to do for your business or whatever like that, like, although no one is there to actually see you scrolling or being less productive, in somewhere in the back of your mind, your subconscious, you will be keeping count. And if you let that build up enough over time, it will completely fuck you up to the point where you don't have that, Alex Hormozi says, that stack of evidence against the the negativity and the doubt. It's actually a stack of evidence of doubt, of like you been doing less and stuff like that. So a lot of it comes down to like being truly honest with yourself. And when you're thinking about like someone's keeping count, they genuinely, your subconscious mind will slowly mentally track the less you're doing, like, or when you're not doing as much. And it definitely will start to have a negative effect on you as a whole.
Jack, just on that, one of the number one things that's really important about what you've just done there is that I share the concept today, and now you're able to share it in layman's terms for anyone that's listening to this to understand, which shows, one, you understood it, and two, it's going to stay with you. Because the number one sign of a charlatan is somebody that can't explain their ideas in like layman's terms to somebody else. So I understand that term because I explained it to you really simply, and then you've been like, right, I get it, it resonates with me, here's how it's going to work for me. And then you've even added to it in terms of like, if I basically build up this amount of proof that I'm not the man that I say I am, guess what? I'm not going to be the guy. I'm going to fall off. So for me, like that whole someone's keeping count, someone's keeping score thing, that's like the little moments when you know nobody's watching. Nobody has any idea.
Just to add a third point to what you just said there as well, what Jack has done is he has reflected on what got said. Okay, so that reflection on today allowed him to soak it in more, think about it more. That self-reflection on how it applies to him has allowed him to actually take that useful piece of information, that bit of wisdom that Colin gave us, and actually apply it to our own lives. And when Jack's saying as well about not doing the things and someone's keeping count, those little small acts of disrespect will program you to just act with disrespect. So if someone, for example, puts you in a position where it needs to be you or them, you're always going to choose them and never choose yourself. You're literally programming yourself to disrespect yourself. So when it comes to the day where it's raining and you could go to the gym, you're going to choose not to because you're not going to respect yourself. You're trained to actually disrespect yourself and not give yourself the best option.
100%. Yeah, you're completely right there. And it's little things. Sometimes it's not even as big as going to the gym. It's like leaving the dishes unwashed overnight when you said you were going to do them. It's not making your bed in the morning before you go out in the day. And these are all tiny things, but all of these are votes for the type of person you want to be. Now, don't get me wrong, you might be listening to this, but like, I'm not the kind of person that says I've got a tidy house or a clean workspace or turns up to work well presented. But maybe you're just not, you're not the kind of person that I vibe with. But if you're thinking about the kind of person you want to be and the kind of role models you've got, many of them are doing the basics really, really well. Like, there's a guy called Jake Humphreys who runs the High Performance podcast. He'll be a future guest on my show. I've been to his live show, spoken to him really well. And he talks about brilliant basics because he's interviewed all these Premier League footballers, Formula One drivers, and so many of them, underneath it all, they just do the little things really, really well all the time, because how you do anything is how you do everything in a lot of cases. So if you go home to your house and it's a riot and it's a mess, that is probably a reflection of some of the other areas of your life as well. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, there's going to be outliers. Somebody will message in, but look, I've just had the best ever year in my business, and my house is a mess, and I've not had it cleaned in 6 weeks, and I can't even see the floor in my bedroom. Okay, cool. You're an outlier. To give you the best possible chance of achieving your potential, you should probably do the small things well and see what comes off the back of it as well. And do the things when no one's watching, when nobody's going to know. Do the things that you were planning on doing when you wanted to be the best version of yourself, because so often we can have these like lofty ideas of like who Jack's going to be, who Kyle's going to be, who Colin's going to be, but if we never do the things in the background when these things accumulate up and add up, then we're never going to reach that potential.
There's such a lack of gratification for these little things though. That's why we don't, because I was speaking to my boy the other day about a DNA methylation test to find out my deficiencies, right? And it's only like £500-600. I've just went and booked Tenerife for the end of the month, £800. Didn't even fucking think twice, but I've not got a DNA test yet. And it's purely because of that instant gratification, that reward of, I'm going to Tenerife now, etc. Whereas if I got a genetic methylation test, now I need to work out, see my deficiencies, work out what supplements I need to take, spend all this more money to then have a prolonged effect and reward over years and to come when I'm later in life. That's why people don't think long-term or think for later life. It's all short-term pleasure, short-term reward. And the lack of long-term vision and acting for long-term future you is, I would say, one of the biggest problems in how people just fucking completely destruct themselves, man. It's crazy.
There's a concept I've been learning about called the 24-hour you, and it's from Jimmy Carr, of all people, who's a comedian.
Yeah.
But he's a
Don't do the laugh, Kyle.
He's a big... Brilliant. But he's an absolute self-development junkie. And he talks about doing things that you're tomorrow self will thank you for.
Yep.
And we're talking about our future self a lot of the time. We're talking about gratification. That's a really good framework to use.
100%.
If you're getting home from work and you're hungry and tired, think about what meal would tomorrow you thank you for. Has tomorrow you got a weight loss goal? Has tomorrow you got a performance goal?
Yep.
He's probably going to want to get you to eat something that's a little bit better than phoning up the chippy or phoning up the Chinese or whatever it is.
Yep.
Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes tomorrow you might be totally cool with that, but chances are he's probably not.
No.
So thinking about tomorrow you or the 24-hour you is a really helpful framework to use as well. Obviously, let's expand our time horizons and our plans.
Yep.
But short term, it can be a great way to be like, well, Wednesday's Kyle, thank me for the behaviours that I did on Tuesday. If not, let's cut some of those behaviours out. Let's change some of them.
Yeah, 100. The best choice that you make in the moment is a choice you make for future you. It's not for you in the moment. Sometimes it can be, obviously, right? But if you go to a chicken shop, right, and you pick the food item you want in the fucking menu, obviously that's for you in the moment. But most of the time, the best choice that you can make in the moment is the one that's going to be serving future you and not serving you in the moment, to look for that kind of short-term pleasure that we're all hardwired to fucking search for. Do you know what I mean? So when you're talking about, obviously, I don't know who was that you spoke about, the high
That was
performance?
Jake Humphreys, host of the High Performance
So
podcast.
we were going to ask you, right? So when you're interviewing these people, you're interviewing millionaires, multimillionaires, like crazy successful people. What do you think has been one of the kind of biggest life lessons you've taken away from those people?
Yeah,
You can generalize, or you can go into different kind of subjects and areas.
I was really thinking hard about this, and I want this to be as relatable as possible. And I've interviewed some amazing people, as you guys know, on the show.
Yep.
One of the people I'm going to call it is Dr. Yusuf Smith. He owns a fitness business actually called Propane Fitness, and they also do online fitness business coaching as well for coaches looking to scale too.
Yep.
And Yusuf was economics graduate, a fund manager for Aberdeen Asset, then a doctor in NHS, and now just runs his fitness business online. So he has a really good understanding of different sectors in terms of being an employee, being somebody that's looked upon really highly as a doctor, but also now somebody that's a business owner. And he talks about analysing how your career or your business meets 4 different currencies. And I wrote these currencies down in order to make sure we nail these. So number 1 is money, a currency that we can all relate to.
For sure.
Number 2 is freedom of time. Number 3 is freedom of location. And number 4 is satisfaction, or you could term that fulfillment or purpose, okay? So one of the things that I learned from the podcast, and this was, back in 2021 that we had this conversation. Look at what you're doing. And of course you might end up, and you guys have said before, your ambition to be multimillionaires. That would meet number 1. Of course it would.
Yep.
But guess what? Being a multimillionaire also meets probably 2 and 3 as well. Because 2 is freedom of time, 3 is freedom of location. If you're a multimillionaire, you probably will have freedom of location,
100.
freedom of time.
Cool.
Number 4, satisfaction, might not be there because you might have earned your money doing something that you're not particularly proud of, you didn't particularly enjoy doing. So anyone in any business or any career can look at that and think about the 4 currencies, and you want to make sure that you have a split between those that you're comfortable with, because you could optimize just for money. I recently interviewed Marcus Hustle. He runs an OnlyFans management agency.
Yeah.
I had a lot of people in my DMs who fundamentally disagree with what he does.
Yeah.
But he earns a lot of money, number 1. He has complete freedom of location. He lives in Dubai, loves it, travels around the world. He's just been in Croatia, just been in Latvia at Christmas.
Yep.
And he has a lot of freedom of time as well, because a lot of his business is automated. And he can charge very, very high amounts for 1 or 2 hours of his time. Satisfaction, is he fulfilled? I don't know the answer to that. We delved into a little bit in the podcast. He doesn't think he's going to do that forever.
Yeah.
But there we go. There's an example
your
of
answer.
a recent guest that's just that I've just reviewed that with.
Yeah.
Anyone could do that right now. So you guys are striving towards something really big. So your satisfaction is probably pretty high when you help a client.
Exactly.
Jack, it's probably pretty high.
Yep.
Money at the moment, we're aiming for multimillionaire status.
Yep.
So we're not there yet.
No.
We're not earning the money that we want. Number 1 is not fulfilled. My
Yep.
currency, number 1, is not there yet. Freedom of time, it's not there yet. You guys are trading time for money with
100.
clients on an hour-to-hour basis, potentially, or a block basis, or a membership basis.
100.
Freedom of location, we're here, aren't we? We're locked in to, or although you go to Tenerife and stuff like that as well, which is really cool. You do camps, that's cool as well. But we're not there yet. So if we look at the 4 currencies, we're not nailing them yet. But number 4 is quite an important one to tick off early, because if you've got satisfaction and fulfillment and purpose, you're probably going to do the work that others are not going to do.
Yep.
Again, total buzzword or buzz phrase that I use all the time. The tools will be heavy, but they'll feel light in your hands.
Sick.
So think about that. You are grafting hard as fuck on your physio business, on your coaching business, Kyle. sometimes it doesn't even feel like work because you're just loving it.
Yeah.
You're like, give me more. I want to create this piece of content. I want to help this guy. I want to have this sales call because I know I can sort this guy out and get him on my program. It's going to change his fucking life.
Yeah.
That's really, really good. So if satisfaction's high, the other three might come with it.
Yeah.
Of course, you've got to like give and take.
That makes you money.
But the four currencies makes you think, doesn't it? Because
100%.
you guys
That's sick.
publicly said you want to be multimillionaires. But as long as it takes into account those other three, then it makes sense to chase that dream. But if it doesn't, then maybe you might sacrifice some of the money. You might only be a single millionaire.
Yeah.
But if you had total satisfaction, I believe, based on the people I've spoken to, they would probably swap the satisfaction for an extra couple mil.
Because that's sick. That's amazing, man. What you just said there. Bro, if anyone at home doesn't soak that fucking in. Bro, I'm rewatching that 5 times. I'm making that my fucking morning alarm.
That's my ringtone.
Yeah, that's fucking amazing.
That's fucking brilliant.
The crazy thing is, to add to that is, obviously, I have a lot of clients that are multi-millionaires. So I do speak to them, and the perspective I have on being a multi-millionaire is pretty, a little bit wider than that of someone that is making the money I am right now. Like, a lot of people just say, I want to be a multi-millionaire, right? But I've spoken to enough people that has given me the insight as to how to become a multi-millionaire, what it takes, etc. And I believe if I keep going the way I'm going, I'll build towards that. And yeah, but while we're on that kind of like self-development, success and stuff, what are the 3 most common traits you've seen in the successful people you've interviewed?
I think one of them, and we've probably done this today, so we'll move on from it quickly and I'll move on to the second one. The first one is doing what they said they were going to do when they said they were going to do it.
Yep.
Because they follow through, they're action orientated.
They're self-accountable.
So many people have these lofty goals, but it's really easy to not follow through on that. In fact, we were talking about dopamine earlier, weren't we?
Yeah.
One of the biggest dumps of dopamine you can get is when you tell someone about a plan or idea that you've got and you don't even do it.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I was guilty of this myself. And my friend Bryce Bell, who I think you guys will get to speak to in due course on your podcast, I promise you it'll be really good. Once a few things in his life are sorted out, he'll do my show and then he'll be doing the rounds.
For sure.
Bryce and I were speaking in July 2019, just a long time ago. I'd just done 4 or 5 guest appearances on podcasts, talking about being the office athlete. I travel around the country. I built a 6-pack. I built a great body. I've got the My Protein sponsorship. I've got the Muscle Food sponsorship. I'm doing really well.
Yeah.
And every single podcast I did, I was sharing it to my audience on Instagram and they were like, oh, I really enjoyed you. You spoke really well. It was interesting. And I'm thinking, I need to get myself one of these podcast things. I need to get myself one.
Yep.
I bought the MacBook. I bought the new MacBook because my one from university was sounding like a plane taking off with a fan going on. It's so old. I bought the mic. I bought Zoom Pro. And I bought some sort of editing software. I think it was like the GarageBand Pro or the upgrade on whatever it was on the Mac. I didn't start the podcast until March 2020 till we're all locked inside, because in July 2019, I said to Bryce, I'm going to start this podcast. The feedback's been amazing from the audience. Here's the first 10 guests I want to talk to. Here's some of the topics. You're one of them, for example. Went through it. And Bryce was like, mate, that'll be so good. And do you know what? The dopamine buzz off that was enough for me for like months to satiate me. There was obviously things like timing and
that is crazy,
the commitment that came
that
to
is
it.
Incredible.
But it's really easy to get a buzz from telling someone what you're going to do and somebody being like, that's going to be great. Like, Kyle, you could tell me about a new coaching product that you've built that you're like, oh, it's got the potential to help guys who are suffering with this particular problem. And I've identified there's this number of guys that are in that space and it's going to cost this. And the number, if I convert it, 1%, 2% is going to be this. And I'll be like, wow, bro, that's amazing. Well done. You haven't even built the product yet. You've just talked about the idea.
Yeah.
And it might be enough for you for a short period to satisfy you, to not do the work. So one of the things that I'm really conscious of, the people that I've spoken to that have done the best on the podcast as guests, they are people that have continually done the things they were said they were going to do and haven't just lived off that cheap dopamine that they haven't quite earned yet.
For sure.
And the kind of false praise that hasn't really been earned just yet. So that's one of the traits. The second one is their communication skills are excellent. Now that might sound a little bit obvious, mate, because they're on a podcast having a conversation with me.
Goes deeper,
but they're
though.
able to articulate their ideas, sell themselves, sell their concepts, and tell their story in a way that resonates.
Yep.
That is one of the number one skills that they've got. And they transfer that into their business, into their personal life, into their whatever they choose to turn their hand to. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure somebody can shout out particular people I've had on the show that haven't done that well across all areas of their life. But across 220 odd episodes at the time of recording this one, Most of the guests I speak to are excellent communicators at conveying their ideas and discussing them. And that is something that we all need to work on. We're going to introduce ourselves thousands of times in the next few months, maybe hundreds, depending on what circumstances you're in.
Yep.
You better get good at it. Better get good at telling people what it is that you do, who you are, what you stand for. And then you can also network really well too.
Yeah.
Because from that, if I understand what Kyle gets up to in his business, if I understand what Jack gets up to in his business, I can provide referrals. I can provide introductions. I can provide, and guess what? You guys are going to appreciate that, aren't you? You're going to send it back my way.
For sure.
The principle of reciprocity is going to be there. So being able to communicate who you are, what you stand for, what you do, what you're interested in, what your values are, we're going to start to bounce off each other so much better. And I've built great relationships with guests who have done that both before recording the show, during recording the show, and then after it as well. And that's a skill that I think so many of us can work on.
Number 3.
Number 3. I want to say stuff like time management and productivity, but I don't think that's probably the most valuable. I'm going to say longer time horizons. Of course, I've had guests that are potentially a little bit impatient, but most of my guests, they think in decades rather than months or years.
Yeah.
They're playing the long game. There's loads of my guests, of course, that have maybe like done something for a little while, pivoted and gone into something else and seen success and moved around. But a lot of the guests that I speak to that are genuine experts in the field, I'm talking like Nariel, Sahil Bloom, Steve Adcock, whoever it is financially that you're like, whoa, or like they're in their field and somebody's like, I want to talk to someone about productivity, Nariel. I want to talk to someone about mindset, Dr. Julie Garner. They've been doing it for decades and they have plans to do it for decades more. So they're thinking with longer term time horizons than the short term buzz that they're maybe going to get from hitting their first 6 figures, hitting their first 7 figures. They're thinking, how do I get longevity in this process? How do I last in it? Equally, they're also thinking, if I have to pivot, what transferable skills have I built in this business or this lifestyle that I can move into this one as well? Richard would be a prime example of that, who we all three of us know really, really well. Richard's done lots of different things over the years, but one of the number one facets of them is his personality, his energy, and his knowledge of those things, and his ability to communicate them has meant that he's been able to move between these things. And he's thinking in decades because that skill is transferable anytime.
It's crazy because, like, obviously the school system, I'll bring it back round. The school system teaches us to think convergently. Convergent thinking, always coming to that one answer, that one solution. But what you're describing there is having a level of divergent thinking where you're thinking long term, but there's many like ways you can go about what you're doing. But when you have the baseline skills, you can start to apply it in so many different areas. Touching on Richard, obviously, Richard Dixon, the man himself, he's such a good communicator. I remember seeing him on Instagram years ago. I remember there's like a little thing where like my girlfriend's dad helped sell his like gold I8 or something like that. So I kind of saw him through that and I was like, oh, gold I8, cool, follow. And then over time, he just drew me into like how well he conveys the message of entrepreneurship and really getting deep into like conveying his message. As you said, communication goes so deep that you begin to negotiate through a video. It's like you're negotiating with the viewer. That's how good you are at communicating. There's no one to negotiate with. You're staring into a fucking camera, but the tone you use, the gestures, the behavior that you're using is so effective that you can start to negotiate with someone through the screen without even having to know who they are. And yeah, I think communication definitely, even looking at Richard, is something that's helped propel his career crazy amounts. Because
you're completely correct, and that's why I called it out as a skill, because you're naming lots of different, or I'm naming lots of different people I've had on the show, and the guest list is really impressive. The first episode I did with Richard back in August 2022 is the most played episode in the entire back archive. One, we got a good energy going, of course we did, but he communicated brilliantly. And it came across really, really well, and people were keen to understand what he's all about, and we really went there for like 2 hours. Because his communication skills are excellent. So there's a lesson there for anyone listening to this. Work on that ability to communicate who you are, what you stand for, and what you do.
Crazy.
And it really opens up a lot of opportunities for you.
It's insane. 100%. And see the successful people you've interviewed, how many of them have got a really strong ego? Because ego is something that can fuck you up completely if you're not aware of it. Do you feel like they've all been aware of their ego? They can just control it? Are they controlled by it? Like, has there been a theme there with ego?
Yeah. Somebody had a really interesting take recently. There's a guy called Ross Harkness. He's well known on Twitter and Instagram for self-mastery and productivity. And Ross has an interesting take on the ego where if the ego forces you to do positive things, then it can be a good thing. So think about this. Your ego might force you to be the most charitable person in your country, in your street, in your city. That's probably got a net positive effect. You're going to work really hard to be able to do that. Your ego might be a character like, I'm going to be like Michael Jordan, for example. I'm going to be the best basketball player that ever lived. I'm going to win this championship and this match and this. I'm going to shoot this number of points in this game.
Yep.
His ego propelled him to new heights. Now, of course, there were lots of negatives off the back of that as well. I think anyone that's seen Last Dance can resonate with that. But his ego, he went into it. He created the character that he wanted to be, and his ego would not allow him to not fulfill the activities, which made him that character.
Yep.
So that's actually quite a good thing in terms of an ego. So I would say it actually varies across the board, Kyle. Some people are aware of the ego, and they ensure that they act in alignment with it to serve it. Others are trying to kill the ego and try and be like, no, keep the ego quiet and don't let it override who I am and make sure I fulfill my purpose. But other people are like, okay, it's a little bit out of control. Let's lean into it and see what happens.
Yeah, 100%. Well, what about the negative side of ego then? So the negative side of ego where you've had trauma previously in your life, the trauma's created like a cut, your ego's created that scar to protect you. And then in life, for example, me and Jack haven't came from a place of making a lot of money. So if we spend a lot of money, our ego goes, fuck, what if we don't get that back? And it's that kind of scarcity mindset we've been brought up into. How have you personally dealt with that? Obviously successful people, but how have you personally dealt with that? Because I'm sure when you're sitting speaking to multi-millionaires and you're not that kind of, like is there a little bit of ego there that's kind of going, fuck?
Oh, that's a great point.
Do you know what I mean?
So as a host myself, who is obviously not in the same realm as a lot of my guests, I'm regularly the stupidest person in the room or the least successful person in the room in a conversation, which is absolutely a good place for me to be as an individual because it means I'm always learning. But in that regard, in terms of me turning up to the conversation, I, have self-awareness of my position in that conversation in terms of I'm a facilitator rather than a leader in the conversation. I'm not somebody that's going to lead the conversation in terms of I'm telling them what to do, I'm telling them how I would do things. So if somebody shares with me about how they ran their ecom business, I've not got a horse in that race. I've never done anything in that business. I'm just going to provide interesting questions to serve my audience and to serve my interests. So I'm showing up from a perspective of I'm going to facilitate this conversation to be the most interesting, informative and value conversation possible, not to maybe tell them how, like the phrase we would have in Scotland, teach a granny how to suck eggs.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't tell.
Never heard that one.
Really? Yeah.
Teach a
granny how to had such a sheltered upbringing, and I'm the one from Bears Then. But
we'll get to that.
In terms of what you're saying there, I'm showing up to the conversation without an ego in terms of trying to put myself on the same level as them in terms of fiscal success or business success. But I'm doing my research. I'm going to ask pertinent questions. I'm going to listen like fuck. And I'm going to ask a question that's related to what they've said, not just what I want to ask next. Yep. And that's something you guys will find with the podcast over time as you get more chilled about it. You'll be like, oh, you'll be able to flow more because you'll have done the reps.
Process what they're saying, ask it. Yeah. So would you question, just for the audience, because it comes back around to what we were speaking about, if you hadn't built up that evidence, would you have been able to go into a room with a multimillionaire and be confident asking questions?
It's a great point. No. You need to prove yourself over time. Now, of course, there's a whole fake it till you make it, and sometimes you need to do that to give yourself the opportunity to gain the experience. Because if not, you're never going to do any reps. Yep. Like if I never interviewed the first successful person, then I'm never going to interview the second successful person, the third one, because I've not done the practice to do it. But over time, I've earned the right to interview, I would say, pretty much anyone on my show now and give them an interesting conversation that my audience will get value from.
Yep.
Because I believe that I can prepare for it adequately, I can handle the conversation, I can manage the flow of it. And I've had a lot of praise from guests about asking something they've not been asked before, or asking about a topic that they're particularly passionate about talking about, but they've not had the opportunity to go into it before, or going a little bit deeper. And that just comes from me practicing and also being completely willing to be the novice. We were speaking about Joe Rogan today during our gym session. He's always willing to ask the question that the audience want to hear. 100%. So I'm always thinking listener. So I'm thinking, what would James, with his AirPods in, out his morning walk, want to hear from Daniel Priestley, who I just interviewed? What would he want to hear from Richard? What would he want to hear from whoever I've had on? And I'm asking that in a way that still sounds like me and still is in alignment with who I want to be as a conversationalist.
100%. A lot of what I feel like is common in a lot of successful people is having a strong purpose. So I want to ask you, like, what do you feel like your purpose is, and how do you reinforce it on a daily, weekly basis? Do you just ask yourself why, or? Of
course. One of the habits that we didn't speak about in terms of alongside my morning walk is I have a journal. I have a gratitude journal. It's called the 6-minute diary. That's the template. Yep. I did try and journal freewheel, but I found that really difficult looking at a blank page or even just writing random prompts from the internet.
Yeah.
So it's got a number of different prompts about what am I grateful for, what would a good day today look like, how I improve, and it has like a positive affirmation as well. And I think affirmations can get a bad rap because people can just fall back on them and that be the only thing.
Yep.
But my affirmation is like around me being a rising tide for all ships. So for me to set an example as myself and try and be a winner, but I'm going to bring other people with me and enable them to win as well.
Yep.
That's one of my purposes in my day job, in my personal life, with the podcast and the content I create. I'm always trying to set a standard and behave in a way that's in alignment with me as the identity that I've got as somebody that's a successful, well put together, clever person that is doing the things they said they were going to do. And I'm also trying to enable people off the side of that to come with me.
Yep.
So like we've had loads of chats about where you guys are going to go with this podcast because I want to give you guys as much help as possible to do that.
Yep. I'm
trying to be the rising tide on that because I believe you guys have got great potential in this space, but you're new to it, you're raw to it, and it's daunting. There's gonna be like in 6 episodes time, you might turn to me and be like, mate, I can't understand why I haven't got good downloads on this one, or I really fudged the question on this, or I didn't prepare as well as I wanted to on this. That's gonna happen. But you've got people like me, and I had people like Chris Williamson, for example, who really helped me as well. So you're able to be that person that you wanted to have in your corner as well.
That's sick. 100%. When it comes to also, not to change the subject, but to change the subject, I'm going to change the subject. When it comes to staying morally correct, I feel like a lot of people, we were speaking about this in the gym today as well, a lot of people in society today don't really have a moral code or a moral compass to follow, and a lot of it comes down to the media they consume. They don't have anything to go off. So that's where we were speaking, where religion does have quite a lot of validity when it comes to staying on track and staying morally correct. You're not religious yourself, but do you feel like society, for a lot of the mainstream people that listen to mainstream media and consume themselves with that, do you feel like religion has relevance when it comes to that, like moral conduct?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this more and more and more.
Because you're not religious, obviously.
I don't have a practicing faith. I was christened a Protestant, so in the Church of Scotland.
Same with us, yeah.
But I haven't attended church for many, many years.
Yep.
And even when I was a little boy and I attended church on a Sunday, we didn't have like regular prayer in the house.
Yep.
For me, I think society has lost something in terms of, one, the actual community aspect. Like one of the principles in the Bible is love thy neighbour.
Yeah.
And nowadays, many people don't even know their neighbour's name and doesn't even
It's
talk
fucked,
to them. You don't even engage with them. Whereas, like back in the past, you wouldn't be able to nip to the 24-hour Tesco. You would go next door and ask them for a pint of milk or some sugar, whatever it was.
For sure.
That's gone from society because we've become too insular in ourselves, in our phones, in our media. But also, we don't trust the people around us because we don't believe they have the same value set and the same moral code as us. And I think religion was one way for that to be the case. And you can definitely argue, and this is something I've really struggled with when I've thought about it and I've maybe considered delving more into faith, has been like, oh, it's a control mechanism for society to get them to behave in a particular way. But if you look at society nowadays, I maybe prefer a more controlled society where we actually had more values that were shared based on the Christian faith or any other religion that comes into this country that practices in a way that's compatible with others. And it's a really, really funny situation where we've lost that community aspect, but we've also lost some of the things that we all kind of were like common ground that we agreed upon that were like sacred and were lines that were not to be crossed. And I think if you look at where we are in society nowadays, that is definitely missing. And I don't know quite how we replace that yet. And we have replaced God, the Christian God, with a lot of false idols.
Yes.
And we're talking about money, for example, and I think that's a really positive thing for young men to strive towards financial freedom, providing for themselves, providing for their family. But that can also be a false deity, and it can also be like the only thing, and to only care about materialism would be a very negative thing indeed, because it wouldn't allow us to be an upstanding member of family, be an upstanding member of community as well, which I think, and I believe that religion in its purest form would achieve, but for argument's sake, it's very difficult for us to find that still. Would
you ever look at considering becoming religious yourself?
I've spent more time considering it due to conversations I've had with close friends, but also I've had people on the podcast over the years who the way they speak about their faith is really powerful. You guys will be too young to remember him, but he's called Simon Thomas. He was a presenter on Blue Peter when I was at primary school. He went on to present Sky Sports. His wife passed away 2 days after a cancer diagnosis in like 2018. Literally like life-shattering stuff, left behind a 4-year-old child or something like that, his son. And I was asking him, like, what was life like during that period? He was like, I just prayed a lot and I believed it was in God's plan. And I was completely shaken by that, because I just thought how angry and upset I would be, especially if that was God's plan, how much anger I would have. But he had complete faith that while this is a terrible thing and a painful thing, it was sent to test him, and that God would guide him onto his next path and support him through that period. And he's gone on to remarry. He's got another beautiful daughter, and they're a happy family. And he's back working on Sky Sports, doing really well. In fact, he actually replaced Jeff Stelling. For anyone that's a Soccer Saturday fan, that's like the main job on Sky Sports. And his ability to have complete faith in the process of prayer and religion and the plan that was set out for him, should he behave in a way that was in alignment with God's principles, was actually really noble and like really admirable to watch that in effect.
Yep.
And again, there's many other guests that I've had on that have cited faith and God's ability to support them to do that.
Because a lot of the thing as well, like, I feel like whether religion, if we can go back and try to actually decipher whether it's real or not, obviously there's all these different religions, Islam, Christianity, all that stuff, right? I feel like regardless of if it's real or not, you're given something power that's going to allow you to stay more aligned with your morals, what you believe in, stuff like that. Like, I feel like believing in God to be real is just as powerful as him being physically real. Whether he might be real, cool. Like, do you know what I mean? But I feel like giving belief to something will give it the power to then like help you. So obviously he went through that hard time. He doesn't know God's real, but he was in such a place of desperation that he had to search for that faith to help him through something. And I feel like religion is so powerful in that sense, where it held him accountable to move forward. Like, that accountability and that almost indirect support from God allowed him to move forward. So that's where I have a lot of Muslim clients, and I have a lot of deep conversations. Like, when you come for a session with me, you probably will sometime in the future, it's not just a treatment session. We go so deep into like their life, my life. We talk a lot about different concepts, stuff like that. And a lot of the Muslim clients, we speak about Islam, right? So indirectly, I'm learning a lot of the relevance of religion and Islam itself. And there's definitely questions that I have about life, or obviously I'm pretty young, so I have a lack of life experience to go off. So things like Islam, I spoke to one of my clients and they said that they feel like they've gained 30 to 40 years of life experience through reading the Quran.
Through the text and the lessons.
Lessons.
We've spoken about this in many other regards that aren't just religious. You can learn so much from
podcasts,
these
everything.
Geniuses who have shared this content, whether it's
Campbell conversations.
Yeah, I mean, that helps too. But I certainly agree. And one of the big things that we've lost with the loss of religion has been the traditional family unit, of which I'm a big proponent. I was very fortunate to be brought up by my mum and my dad, who stayed together and supported us.
Yeah.
And I believe that put me in a very privileged position to have a very stable upbringing as well. And that has been lost from society and almost encouraged to be moved away from by a loss of faith. Whereas when we had religion, yes, maybe women stayed in marriages that were terrible, and that's a negative thing. And it's important that women have the ability to escape from these things with the right of divorce, etc. But we have lost the ability for a man and a woman to be stable, to then choose to marry before the eyes of God and, of course, the government, and then to bring children into the world, into an environment that they benefit from as well. And that's one of my big beliefs, that we would benefit from having more of that in today's society as well. And I think a lot of statistics bring to bear that single-parent households can have adverse results for the children. And that's not to belittle people who do a fantastic job of raising their kids into that environment, but facts and figures don't often really care about that. They do instead indicate that if you have stability around you, both financially and in terms of love and support and shelter, then it's going to support your outcomes.
100%. So see, coming away from religion, right, doesn't really interest me too much, that topic. See Cole that was in high school, wasn't very sociable, wasn't very like kind of confident in that social circle, to Cole now that's fucking networking with multimillionaires, doing all the mad things. At some point you changed who you were around, you changed the environment that obviously shaped your ability to achieve goals that you probably didn't even think you could have before. How important is that, and what kind of changes did you make to the people around you? Because the first podcast we spoke about, if you can't change the people around, change the people around you. I'm just interested, like, who have you started to surround yourself by more? Like, how has that affected you in terms of
the first answer to that question? The most important thing is you don't necessarily need to have an explosive fallout with the people that you're friends with at the moment.
Yeah.
Because I think that's something that people really, really worry about. You will start to distance yourself naturally by your actions. Do you want to come to the pub on Friday? No thanks, can't make it. I've got this on Saturday morning. Okay, cool. Do you want to come in the pub on Friday? No thank you, I've got this on next Saturday morning. Do you want to come to the pub on Friday? No thanks, I'm not drinking this week. I'll drive and I'll come for a bit. Nah, don't worry about it, bro. They will stop asking you.
Yeah.
If you are doing things that are out of alignment with the person you want to become, your circle will change by nature of that. There is a crossover period between you becoming or working towards a closer version of the person you want to become and the person you are just now. A little bit of loneliness. That's going to happen.
Yep.
But this is why social media has a net positive effect for me overall. It can be it can be very, very negative.
Yeah.
Terrible place to be. But make social media social. The clue is in the fucking name.